Ever wondered about the origins and evolution of rock and roll? Let's go back to where it all began. The birth of rock and roll is a rich tapestry woven with threads from blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, and gospel. As we delve into the early 20th century, we encounter artists who, though they might not have known it, were shaping the future of music. Robert Johnson, with his haunting blues and masterful guitar work, set a precedent for emotive, raw music. Bessie Smith, the Empress of the Blues, commanded audiences with her powerful voice and unapologetic lyrics. Louis Armstrong, a titan of jazz, pushed musical boundaries with his innovative improvisations and charismatic performances. And let's not forget Sister Rosetta Tharpe, whose gospel music, infused with a distinct rock and roll flair, earned her the title of the genre's godmother. These early pioneers laid the groundwork for what would soon become a musical revolution. As we move into the 1950s, the term rock and roll starts to gain traction. This new genre, with its pulsating rhythm and rebellious undertones, quickly becomes synonymous with youth, rebellion, and freedom. It's the soundtrack to a generation eager to break free from the confines of the past. At the heart of this musical revolution are some of rock and roll's most legendary figures. Elvis Presley, with his captivating charisma and hip-shaking performances; Chuck Berry, whose guitar riffs set the stage for generations to come; Little Richard, with his flamboyant showmanship; Buddy Holly, the bespectacled boy next door with a rock and roll soul; and Jerry Lee Lewis, whose frenzied piano playing earned him the nickname, The Killer. These artists, and others like them, defined the sound and attitude of a decade. Significant events like the release of Rock Around the Clock and Elvis Presley's groundbreaking appearance on the Sullivan Show only served to fuel the rock and roll fire. With its rebellious spirit and electrifying performances, rock and roll had firmly taken hold of the public's imagination. The 1960s saw rock and roll branching out, embracing new sounds and influencing a generation. This era was marked by the diversification of rock and roll, with the emergence of subgenres such as psychedelic rock, garage rock, folk rock, and blues rock. Each subgenre brought a unique flavor to the musical landscape, broadening the scope of what rock and roll could be. In the midst of this musical evolution, the hippie culture rose to prominence, deeply interwoven with the rock and roll scene. Key artists of this era, including the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin, left indelible marks on this transformative period. Their music, often reflective of the social and cultural changes of the time, became anthems for a generation. One of the era's most iconic events, Woodstock, gathered hundreds of thousands of music lovers, solidifying the cultural significance of rock and roll. As the decade closed, rock and roll had become a cultural phenomenon, resonating with audiences worldwide. As we move into the 1970s and beyond, rock and roll continued to evolve and adapt. The decade saw the emergence of classic rock, punk rock, hard rock, and glam rock, each with its unique sound and attitude. Artists like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Who, and Queen not only filled stadiums, but also became global icons, carrying the rock and roll torch into a new era. The 1980s marked another significant shift with the advent of MTV. This platform revolutionized how rock music was presented and consumed, giving birth to the music video and bringing rock and roll into living rooms around the world. Into the 21st century, rock and roll continued to evolve, birthing new genres and artists while maintaining its status as a major force in global music culture. Just as a river flows, changing its course but never losing its essence, so too does rock and roll. From its humble beginnings to its current status as a global force, rock and roll continues to captivate and inspire. So, what have we learned about the journey of rock and roll? We've traced its roots back to the early 20th century, exploring its origins in blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, and gospel. We've seen how the term rock and roll gained popularity in the 50s, becoming a synonym for youth, rebellion, and freedom. We've witnessed the diversification of its sound in the 60s, and its evolution into classic rock, punk rock, hard rock, and glam rock in the 70s. We've observed its further diversification and the impact of technology on its presentation and consumption in the 80s and beyond. Through all these changes, rock and roll has remained a major force in global music culture, continuing to evolve while influencing and being influenced by social, political, and cultural shifts. As we reflect on the rich and complex history of rock and roll, one thing is clear. Its spirit of rebellion, freedom, and innovation continues to resonate, making it a genre that truly stands